Welcome to the CFO Track podcast, where we inspire and educate future finance leaders to help them stay on track to CFO. I'm your host, Tom Hunter, and every week I'll be bringing you stories from some of Australia's best and brightest CFOs and the lessons they learnt along the way. My goal for the podcast is to provide learning and development opportunities for those wanting to get to the level of the guests on this show, but they just didn't have the access to those lessons otherwise. Let's get into it. On this week's episode, I'm speaking with Adrian Bongiorno. Adrian's the CFO for 40 Winks Franchises. Adrian tells a brilliant story about getting out into the business and learning how it operates, and it's helped him build commercial business partnering functions both in the UK and here in Australia with David Jones. What I love about Adrian's journey is that it shows you can achieve success going via the commercial route post-uni rather than the typical audit or Big Four firm, and there's actually a lot of benefits to doing it that way. Adrian's a natural storyteller, and I know you're really going to enjoy this one. So here we go.
Adrian Bongiorno, thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Good stuff. How's the week been?
It's been good. It's been busy, getting ready for a really big Cyber November. But yeah, that's see where we are in retail at the moment. So it all revolves around Cyber November these days.
Good. I think when we last spoke, you were knee or neck deep in a bunch of different deadlines. How are you tracking through those?
Yeah, they're still around my neck. So it is funny. We've got board meetings and committee meetings kind of every kind of second month. So it does seem like there's always a deadline that we're running to. Yeah, we're getting there.
That's how it goes, I guess. I've given the guests, so the listeners, a bit more of an intro of yourself. It'd be great to hear it from you of what you're doing in the minute, a bit more about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I am currently the CFO of 40 Winks Franchising. So 40 Winks, I'm sure most listeners would have heard of us. We're in the retail space. We're in bedding, 115 stores around Australia. So that's where I am at the moment. Prior to this, I started my career. I've been really fortunate to have kind of a mix, kind of big and small companies, Australian international experience. Off the top of my head, spent some time at BHP, some time at Coles and David Jones, and also some great kind of international companies like the GSMA, as well as my family business that I've always been a part of.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah,
good to get into that a little bit. So we'll go back to the start. So when did you know that you wanted to get into accounting? What triggered it?
Triggered's probably the right word, to be honest. But I think it's probably, if I think back, there's actually probably two messages that I probably internalized, right? That kind of drove me here. First one, I mentioned my family business. My family has been in the cheese business forever. And as a kid, me, my brothers, my cousins, we all used to work there, work in the plant. And I think, while I didn't appreciate it at the time, I think, my dad was kind of using that as an opportunity to kind of instill in us this idea that hard work is what matters, right? More than anything. And if you wanted to do something other than kind of work in a factory, which, is, I can see the beauty in it now, but it's hard work, go to school and go get an education. So academic pursuits were always really highly valued. And the other one, and maybe something that, I kind of saw as a kid, and it was different, but it felt like, whenever there was a question, whenever there was something we didn't know, the one person whose kind of counsel my dad kind of really relied upon and really valued was a friend of his, but it was our accountant.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I think, I kind of internalized those two messages as a kid, which was, education and hard work, but also, this role, this potential kind of profession is something that's valued, and it's something that can really help. And I think that kind of drove me there.
Yeah, nice. And then, so you went to uni, commerce degree, I think, from memory, but you didn't go to Big Four like so many people. But there are other route, PHP, is that right?
Yeah, it was. I've got to say, I did apply at Big Four, and I had an offer from KPMG, but I applied for business services.
Yeah. Okay.
And what I got an offer to was for audit, and that's just not where I see myself. That wouldn't have worked for me. I wouldn't have been successful there. And conversely, like BHP was perfect. for me, especially in those early days, like, where I learn is on the job, like at the coalface. And again, I'm used to working in a factory. Like I'm used to kind of making cheese and, being on the production line. So, in an environment where I was just in corporate, detached from the coalface, like that wouldn't have been ideal. Right. So BHP was perfect. It was confronting though. And it was interesting. I got the job, after uni, but, I didn't start for 12 months. So I got the job and they said, all right, well, you start in 12 months time. And I thought, okay, fantastic. I went and did it.
Yeah, nice.
And I thought, you know what, I'll spend every cent I have and then come back and start working properly. And I remember being in Argentina, getting a call from some random number, which I answered, and it was someone from BHP.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, congratulations. We finally know where you're going to be when you start working. You're going to be in Port Hedland. Congratulations. I said, oh, fantastic. That's really good. Thank you very much. And then I didn't even think to ask any questions. And my mates who I was with at the time said, what was that? I said, I'm going to be working in Port Hedland. They said, where's that? I went, I don't know. I didn't ask. So I had to go find an internet cafe and I spent, 40 minutes trying to find Port Hedland, but I was spelling it wrong. And I couldn't find it. And I was like, oh no, what have I done? Where am I going? I'm going to be in Siberia somewhere. But, I wasn't. It was Northern WA and it was a fantastic opportunity. And it was, like I said, it was perfect for me.
Yeah. How confronting was that going into an environment because Port Hedland, it does have a bit going on there, but it is very rural. It's not quite a cheese factory in Tullamarine. So what was?
It was very different. It was very different. It's a very remote place. There's not a lot there. So, and it's changed a lot these days. It's much more of a thriving community today. I think when I got there, I was kind of at the tail end of how these mining towns used to survive, which was literally, you fly in as many guys as you can. They live on site for 2 weeks, they go back home for a week and they come back. And, it's a very unhealthy business model. It's a very unhealthy way to live for the people who do it. People make a lot of money doing it, and that's kind of why they keep doing it.
Did you FIFO or did you stay on camp?
So I lived there for the first 2 years. I then negotiated a FIFO contract from Melbourne, which they did not do because there were no direct flights at that time. And I thought I was a genius. But 6 months in, I realized why they don't do it. It's because it's terrible. And, I was flying for 14 hours a fortnight. I think that's probably a common theme through my career as well, like thinking I know best and kind of going down a path. And then 6 months later going, actually, no, or maybe there was some wisdom in someone telling me to slow it and not do it this way.
Nice. So you got some pretty good exposure then while you're there?
Yeah, it was fantastic. And, I always kind of talk about when I think about the companies I've worked for, I think what's kind of made me successful is I think I've been able to identify what's good or what works for me and what I like and what doesn't, right? And I always say when I think of BHP, especially then, especially during kind of peak boom time, right? The term that comes to mind is just the art of the possible. What you can do when resource is just of no object. And as a graduate, what that meant was, I was contributing, sure, but they weren't counting on my contribution. I could spend hours on the site understanding how the conveyor belt system would work and how I could achieve efficiencies in the maintenance schedules, which, at any other role, like I just wouldn't have the resource to do that. I couldn't spend the time and effort kind of applying my mind to these challenges because you need to get the bread and butter done. So it was a fantastic place to be. And like I said, for me, it was perfect because that's how I learn. For BHP, I think frankly, I was a really good fit for them as well because they didn't want auditors. They didn't want people who wanted to sit in the office and check that control measures were done. They wanted people to get up, go onto site, speak to people and figure out what was going on and what wasn't working. So it was, like I said, for that point in my career, it was perfect.
And because you learn so much when you're out at operational sites too. And that doesn't have to be the case for a mining business. It could be for a manufacturing business, could be engineering, could be anything out where the action is. See, because you probably left there at a similar point to where you might have left Big Four or where most people leave Big Four after that 3 to 4 year mark. So where do you feel you were positioned leaving that in terms of that point in your career? What was that like?
Yeah, I was so far ahead. Like I was so far ahead of, my mates, my friends from uni who, had gone to Big Four.
Mm.
Don't get me wrong, that Big Four experience is really valued in market, and it's valued for a really good reason. They're trained and they're educated really well. But in terms of, my ability leaving BHP to be able to go into another organization, partner with, some senior execs and really add value to their business unit, there was daylight between us.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that's what I spent every day doing. So I was familiar with it. I knew how to do it. Like I knew how to, and again, I kind of think with a retail lens now, but I knew how to identify my customer and try and understand their needs and their wants, right? And then tailor my approach to that, which, the cohort who came out of, those audit roles just hadn't done yet, right? So yeah, so like I said, it was a perfect fit for me at that point in time. Yeah, having said that, I've now then later on in my career gone, okay, all these commercial skills and all these kind of stakeholder management skills that I learnt are fantastic and they're my strength, right? But the financial control is, where I have opportunity now. And, that would be the reverse, right? If I'd gone down the other path.
Yeah. And so you finished there and then went through a couple of roles and spent some time in London. Was it GSMA? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think leaving BHP, I think I kind of meandered around a little bit. Like I think I probably changed roles every, 12 to 18 months for, for a number of years.
Mm.
I spent some time in some good places like Coles and stuff, but nowhere that I kind of really felt, at home until I got to the GSMA in the UK. Now they're an industry body and they're a non-for-profit. They're the only non-for-profit I've ever worked for, but that was just such a fantastic experience. And they're a much smaller scale to anything I'd been a part of till that point.
How big were they at the time? Staff or team?
So they had a lot of staff and they had like 30 offices around the world, right?
Okay.
So they're geographically dispersed. In terms of size, revenue, they probably would have been, about 200 million Aussie dollars a year.
Significant enough though.
Yeah, significant enough. So big enough to give you opportunity, right? The way I like to think of them, but small enough that my contribution could move the dial.
Yeah.
So, and again, contrast that to BHP, that was at the time $350 billion market cap. I was doing a good job and I was learning a lot and I was contributing, but I'm not moving the dial on BHP's market cap, right?
Sure.
As much as I'd love to think I was,
Yeah.
but we're not talking about the days when Adrian Bongiorno was there. You know what I mean?
So you progressed to what, 3 roles in 3 and a bit years at GSMA. So you must have been doing something right.
Yeah. So I came in again, probably a bit of good fortune, good timing, but phenomenal leadership as well.
Mm.
So, I came in, GSMA were trying to build, they had management accountants and they were trying to create like a true business partnering function.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that was my bread and butter. That's what I'd been doing. So they kind of brought me in, show us how this works, show us what's possible. And I did. I kind of, within the first 6 months, I built trust, kicked some goals. And then from there, it was like, okay, well, take on the management accounting team and build a path, turn this team into business partners, which I did over a course of 12 months. And then after that, it was like, all right, absorb the rest of the finance team and bring best practice to them as well. So
where do you start when you're saying turn them into business partners? What's the 3-step play for you?
Yeah. So I think it's interesting because it was the first time I had done it. Like I'd always been a single contributor, and that was the first time I had to take my method. I say my method, but it was BHP method, right? And distill that into something I could teach others. So, the way I went about it was, firstly to articulate what the vision was, right? And why. So, this is what good looks like. This is what we're aiming for. And this is why we're aiming for it, right? And frankly, the mission is pretty simple. As a business partner, your client should not want to take important meetings or important decisions without your input, right? If you're doing your job right, if you're a CFO, your CEO should be saying, I'm not signing that off without consulting my CFO, right? And it's not that you're the policeman, it's that you're that trusted advisor, right? And then again, if I think back to kind of that lesson at Albercheese, that's what that was, right? It was someone that my dad could rely upon and say, hey, we're doing this thing, I'm unsure, give me that reassurance and guidance.
Yeah.
That's what you need to target, right? Now, that's what good looks like. Let's understand where you are today. So there was a lot of kind of capability testing to understand what they were doing well, what was kind of missing the mark, and then putting that plan in place to say, all right, this is what we need to do to get from here to here. These are the kind of landmarks along the way, and we'll track our path along there. I think like I said, it was the first time I'd ever done it. I had the support of, like I said, the best management I've ever worked with at the GSMA. And I had the support of HR and stuff to help me put content together and, track that path and whatnot. I think having said that, though, the initial cohort was 3 management accountants and 2 of them absolutely loved it, right? It allowed them to get the commercial engagement, which they thought they deserved and wanted, but were never quite able to get. So that was fantastic. There was one who it didn't work for. And, I kind of think about this a lot because, it was the first time I've ever had to kind of get rid of an employee, which was a really tough thing to do.
Yeah.
I think what helped was the expectations were really clear. I was able to say, this is where we are today. This is where we're going to get to. These are the landmarks along the way, track our progress. And we've got 12 months, right? So, after month 3, it was pretty clear to say, listen, we're not really hitting these benchmarks.
Yeah.
Why aren't we hitting them? What can we do to kind of get you up there? Now, ultimately, it wasn't.
And then they kind of
wasn't
just self-select in or out then from that point, right?
Yeah, it was. And I think what it made really apparent with this particular employee was, it wasn't a question of capability. It was a question of style. Traditional British accountant who, didn't really feel comfortable challenging, right? They didn't feel like it was their space. So they didn't want to occupy that space. But, that's the difference between like your finance business partner and your management accountant, right? Your business partner needs to be able to challenge your assumptions respectfully, right? But you need to be able to challenge. You need to be able to check all those assumptions and say, I understand what you're trying to achieve. I don't think this plan is going to get us there. But ultimately, this person didn't feel comfortable in that space, and we had to correct for that. So that was my experience at the GSMA. Like I said, it was different from the experience I'd had in the past. It was a different scale. It was a different set of challenges and a much greater focus on leadership and soft skills.
Yeah. So then you spent 3.5, 4 years in London, then came back home. And so what was that like? I talk to people about this all the time because working overseas is such a life-changing character building experience. You definitely change, you learn, you grow, and then you come back home and reintegrating back into that with your friends or your colleagues or people that you knew. It doesn't go back in exactly the same way because you're different and they might not be. So how was that coming back?
Yeah, that's definitely true. And, when you speak to, expats, when you speak to Aussies who have done that, gone abroad and come back, lots of people kind of talk about that experience. And I think to some extent I was, really fortunate. I went with my wife, son was born over there. We're there for long enough, there for long enough that friends came and visited, family came and visited, and, we went back home a number of times and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of kept those relationships going while we were away. So I think from my experience, it was somewhat different. Like we didn't, not see each other for 5 years and then kind of come back.
Yeah.
But, I think the biggest kind of change for me wasn't really personal. It was professional. So I feel like, especially at the GSMA, the working culture was really adult is the only way I can really describe it.
Yeah.
It was before COVID, but, we did lots of remote working, right? And I had to because, I had a number of teams. I was in the UK. I had people in Spain, in Hong Kong, in the US. It was just a way of working. The GSMA was geographically dispersed. So, we were probably, ahead of the curve in terms of kind of remote and hybrid working and that sort of thing. Coming back to Oz, what I found was the job market was probably a lot more, I don't want to say old, I'm trying to find the right term to describe it. But, in the UK, when I was looking for roles, I'd be able to find roles and eager employers in, every industry. When I came back to Oz, the job market felt stagnant.
Can be really sheltered. So international experience in Australia doesn't get the light that it should.
No,
Can be very old school in Australia,
yeah.
unfortunately.
So, coming back, because I had, BHP on my CV and Incitec Pivot,
Yeah.
miners wanted to talk to me and heavy industries wanted to talk to me, right?
Okay.
And because I had coals on there, some retailers wanted to speak to me, right? But anything other than that, crickets.
Yeah, right. Interesting.
And I feel like, about like one of the best things about being in finance is your skill set is just ultimately transferable.
Yeah.
Every organization needs this, but I feel like in Oz, it's very much an employer's market to some extent. And there's very much a reluctance to look outside the box, right? And I don't know exactly why that dynamic exists, but in lots of instances, employers want an employee who's doing that job, but just for someone else.
Yeah.
So I feel like for me, kind of that was the most jarring thing, kind of coming back and having that international experience. It wasn't really valued to an extent.
Mm.
And it kind of didn't feel like it had driven my career forward in the way that I'd kind of hoped it would have.
Yeah, it's a pretty common theme, to be honest. You do hear about it quite a bit, and you're not necessarily taking a backward step. It might be a sideward step, but just not the step forward that you hoped you might.
Yeah.
It sounds like you found your home pretty quickly, though, with DJs.
Yeah, I did. So I'm trying to think how long, it was a pretty quick kind of process with DJs.
Yeah.
And again, DJs was a great place to be. I think I was at DJs for about 5 years.
Yeah.
And again, if I think of the DJs as an interesting place because, you would think such an institutional name, everyone knows about it, a powerful brand, and there's some really great people there. But there's also, they've had, 10 years of really tough trade, and that's just taken a toll on that organization. So you have pockets of really well-considered, well-funded, activities within David Jones, but just by the nature of it, then you get others which are just the opposite, and they're very much lacking in maturity and process, right? So, going into DJs, my remit was to create a commercial finance function for their supply chain. And, it was a fantastic opportunity for me because, I was armed with, having done it in the GSMA, having all this kind of best practice experience from BHP, and being kind of senior enough and kind of knowing enough to really put it to practice within David Jones. And again, I was really successful there. So I started off creating that commercial finance function for the supply chain. By the time I left, which was, 4 years later, everyone kind of used to make fun of my title at the bottom of the email because it used to go literally all across the page because it was, head of commercial for supply chain, online, food, visual marketing, financial service. Like, it was just ridiculous. But, DJs was a place where, if you put your hand up, they're willing to roll the dice and give you a shot. And I was, and it worked really well.
Yeah, nice. So what sort of projects were you working through at the time?
Yeah, so the biggest project I was working on, I was brought on, like I said, to build the supply chain commercial finance function. Part of that was then working on their distribution network redesign. So David Jones traditionally didn't really have a supply chain. They used to just get suppliers would deliver stuff to the back of stores. They had one warehouse in Sydney, but it wasn't really fit for purpose. And this was about understanding David Jones 10 years from now and designing a distribution network that would meet the needs of tomorrow's David Jones. That was a fantastic project to be a part of. And, I was the commercial lead on it, right? So my role really was the easiest role within the project. I was doing all the modeling, which is technically difficult, right? But, I think what I did well and, enabled me to succeed in that, I was able to kind of partner with all the various parts of David Jones and get them to contribute in a way that they felt safe, that they felt that their opinions were valued, that they could contribute, and no one kind of felt like, that their contribution was silly or that it wasn't valued or that, the decision had been made already. Right. And I think they tried this project in the past and kind of were unable to overcome those elements. And again, like if I think to my career, I think, where I learned those was at the GSMA. Like I said, I had phenomenal leadership at the GSMA. And part of my skill set is being able to identify it and say, yeah, that's what I want to replicate, and that's what I was able to do. So that's what drove my success. Not so much like the technical stuff was valued, right? It was those soft skills. It was being able to bring people along for the journey and get them to feel valued and like they could contribute, right?
Did you do anything differently with that approach? So from GSMA, that same creating the business partnering culture or function through to David Jones, when you're doing it the second time, you're going to add your learnings, you're going to add your extra herbs and spices and all that kind of thing. So how did you do it differently the second time?
Yeah, I love the KFC reference, by the way. That's a great addition. But I think I learned a lot between those two roles. And I think probably the key thing I did differently was in David Jones, I was more flexible. And I think, looking back, like I said, I was successful at the GSMA, but I do think I was too rigid in my approach. And, I feel like potentially it was part like, I internalized it from the brief, which was kind of, you're the expert, come in, show us, scale it. And I think I took that to some extent, and it was my first kind of leadership kind of experience, to mean, you can't show that you don't know, right? You have to put across that you have the answer and exude confidence, right, in every interaction, which, I tried to do. I think I had less of that hookup at DJs. And I was more comfortable to say, yeah, I don't know. Let's try it your way.
Do you think you had more success or it happened quicker as a result?
I don't think it happened quicker, but I think the success was more sustained, right? Because I think, especially with my kind of teams, I had them operating at the GSMA probably with kind of more guardrails, which meant, they were delivering a vision, like my vision, closer to what I believe it was, but it was probably less authentic to them. So while it brought me to my outcome quicker, over the long term, it was less sustainable for them, right? Whereas at GSMA, I think I was able to give my team the benefit of my experience, right? But I was more comfortable to let them forge their own path and figure out how they're going to deliver it. And I think ultimately, ultimately it felt more authentic and it felt more like something that they were comfortable to replicate month after month, year after year, and put their own stamp on.
Yeah. And so you finished up with David Jones and the 40 Winks role came along. How did that eventuate? What was that transition like? That was your first CFO role, right?
Yeah, it was. It was.
Yeah.
So I left DJs as part of the kind of sale to Anchorage.
Yep.
And I was looking for my next opportunity. It was I was at kind of a bit of an inflection point in my career. Either, we discussed that, I started my career in these kind of commercial roles and I had been on that path since. I'd never deviated from it and nor did I wish to, right? I liked it. But I was at that point where I was like, okay, I'm not going to step into a CFO role at, a DJ's, a Coles, a Myer, that sort of thing, right? At this point in my career, so either I'm going to keep going kind of head of commercial type things at a large listed business, doing largely the things I've been doing, or the other fork in the road was to address some of the, development areas, which I kind of hadn't addressed throughout my career, right? And that was ostensibly kind of financial control. And this was an opportunity to do that. So step into a SME, so a smaller business, broader remit, a broader role. And yeah, that's been 40 Winks. So I've been there for 3 years now. And really, again, the remit here was, this is probably the first company I've been to in a long time where the remit wasn't something's broken, something's missing. We need you to
Yeah.
come in and fix
Yeah.
something, right? The remit was, this company's been around for 40 years doing exactly what we intend it to, right? It's trading well, the network is growing, our franchisees are successful. We will be looking at growth in the kind of medium term, like, aggressive growth. But right now, it's sticking the path. We have a strategy and we want someone to continue executing on it.
Yeah. So that transition where you're acknowledging the technical component, did you find that difficult at first when you're coming into a role that might be a bit more controllership, might be a little bit more technical? Did you have difficulty in that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, frankly, yeah, there was. And I think the other challenge I had was the team had left, right? So not for any particular reason, but just over the kind of course of the last 12 months, they kind of lost a lot of talent. So, there was institutional knowledge, there were massive
Yeah.
gaps in it.
Yeah.
So, there was a large body of work to sit back and understand why they were doing what they were doing,
Mm.
why they were doing it that way, and then kind of figure out actually, is this, does this suit the ends that we're trying to get to?
Yeah.
And it was challenging, right? Like anything, there was a problem to be solved. And, I feel like I'm a pretty good problem solver. But yeah, there was a lot of kind of, technical accounting stuff that I hadn't just put my mind to for some years.
And how do you combat that? How do you work through that if it's not your core or your weapon, I suppose? How do you combat that?
You need good people around you, mate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, frankly, and I think, again, if I had stepped into this role or a role like it when I went to the GSMA, I would have said, all right, how do I solve this? I need to learn it all myself tomorrow. And I would have buried myself in kind of content and learning and courses to do it. But, I don't have to know all the things now, right? There is that
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
conception, but, I have a team, like a really good team around me.
Mm.
Like I said, going into 40 Winks, I had to build that team. But, you build for the skills that you lack, right? So, I brought in like a really capable financial accountant, who was across, those details that I wasn't, right? There were other things that I had to upskill on, obviously. I think, like I said, there's a misconception that you need to have all the answers, and you don't. You need the right team around you.
Yeah. And so where do you see the business going over the next few years? Your role, how does that all tie in?
Yeah, so 40 Winks, we're on a really exciting trajectory at the moment. So it's probably been, the toughest 2 years for Aussie retail in a
Yeah.
long time.
Yep.
And 40 Winks has outperformed the market considerably over that time. We've done really well, really well.
Yeah. Great.
And we've done it largely, not by coming up with, a good new product or, a new fancy device. What we've done is we've taken some time to sit back, reflect on our values, reflect on what has made us successful over the last 40 years, and really go back to market with a message which really reflects that, which is really authentic and people resonate with. And it's easy because, our message is really simple. We've got, you go into a store, you're talking to the owners of that store. These people are really passionate about what they do. They're really passionate about helping their customers, and it resonates. So it's been a very authentic campaign, and it's worked really well. Over the next kind of 5 years, we have a plan for growth.
Okay. Yep.
Largely organic, right? There are many neighborhoods around Australia that don't have a 40 Winks yet, and
Yep.
they will be getting one. It's different. It's in a franchise network. It's very different to kind of working in a corporate setting. There are protections that need to be built in, so existing franchisees are not impacted by the growth. We're not going to put, a new store right next to an existing one that kind of cannibalizes that market, so it adds a bit of complexity.
Mm.
But I think for us, the wellness category and the way Australians think about health and sleep in connection to their health is really changing, and that's really fruitful ground for us.
Yeah.
And in terms of what that means for me as the CFO of this organization, it means kind of new challenges around how we support that growth, how we do so in a way which is value accretive to our existing franchisees and not competition to them. But really, my role will shift to be almost kind of completely focused on value creation as our finance function matures and kind of governance and all the related elements are really kind of locked down and are really mature.
Yeah, gotcha. And so where do you see the broader market over the next couple of years? Can be retail, accounting, etc.
Yeah, I think I'll probably tackle those two separate. So for retail, I think barring any changes in the landscape, which God knows we could be invaded by New Zealand next week, who knows? But
Who knows?
I would say we've had a period of contraction, right, over the last 2 years, which has been really tough for the Aussie consumer. I think what we're seeing now is with interest rates kind of coming down, I think what we should see is a greater propensity to spend and moderate growth in GDP over the next couple of years, right?
Yeah,
Now,
okay.
I think that will be tempered by, the actions of the RBA. We've got, unemployment kind of creeping up. And I think there's a bit of a reluctance to lower interest rates to combat that. And I think from my perspective, I think the state of the economy on the ground is a bit worse than what it appears, in the stats.
Yeah, interesting.
I think retailers will see, overall, retail spending is kind of largely flat, a little bit up. But in order to do that, retailers are giving away margins significantly. So it is a very tough market for retailers at the moment. I'm expecting some moderate improvement over the coming years tied to this reduction in interest rates as we get to hopefully a neutral rate over the next 12 months.
Yeah,
right.
gotcha.
In terms of the finance market, I think the finance market will be disrupted over the coming years. And I think it probably already has to some extent. But, finance is a very resilient, part of the economy, right? Like everyone always needs finance people. But I think what we're doing will shift. And I'm already doing it. So, I think lots of people are terrified about kind of AI kind of taking their jobs.
Yeah.
I am a little bearish on that, frankly. If I've invested a fair bit in upskilling, my organization in AI, but frankly in the SME space and with most of the kind of people I talk to in my net, creating the business case for significant AI investment just really isn't there right now. And it's different in large multinationals, right, where there's scale. But in the SME space, I don't think we know it well enough. So, I was looking at AI providers around what solutions we could implement. And actually what I've said is, let's take a step back and let's just educate everyone on what AI is and what's possible.
Yeah,
and over the 12 months, we'll let the various functions kind of come back with the applications they think will work kind of for their functions, right?
okay.
So
What does
while
that training look like? You giving them like tips and tricks, instructions on how to use an LLM, or how are you doing it specifically?
Yeah, part of it is that. Part of it is understanding what tools are available in the market. Part of it is understanding business cases from other organizations and what is working and what isn't working. And then the other part, is looking at specific tools that we think have an application in our business, ChatGPT being one of them, and saying, let's actually dive in and actually kind of use this and figure out kind of what applications there are. And don't get me wrong, there are some design ones which our marketing team are getting a huge amount of value out of. So there is value there. It just, I would caution any kind of SME to throw kind of big dollars at it just yet.
Yeah.
I think we need to learn first, frankly.
How far into this project are you?
So we've just finished this kind of 12-week course.
Okay, cool.
For everyone in my organization has been a part of it.
Yep.
And what we're asking is everyone to find a new application for it within their roles every week.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right. And then we'll revisit. So, where there are business cases for it, absolutely we'll revisit it.
Yeah.
But I didn't see the basis for it at this stage, right? I couldn't see any winning business cases.
Has there been anything across the team or across the business where they've had a significant return on?
And again, not significant because we don't have the scale. So
Yeah.
you can think of, and again, I spoke to someone at, one of the big banks, and they're talking about, the millions of dollars of value they extracted with chatbots, right? It's like, that's great. I don't have millions of dollars of payroll at all. So, you know what I mean? Like the applications just need to be different, right? And like I said, I'm sure there will be business cases. I just don't know them yet. But what I will say that I am certain of is, if you don't know, like as a finance professional, if you don't know how to use AI and implement it into your role and your way of working, in 10 years, I think you'll be unemployable.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be a fundamental skill set.
It's the next phase of tech, right? So it's just upskilling yourself and keeping yourself current.
Yeah. And it'd be the equivalent of someone today saying, oh, sorry, I don't know how to use the internet. It's like, I'll use books. You'd be like, okay, that's great. Thanks. And well, please leave your CV on, over there, and we'll be in touch. Right.
Yeah.
But yes, like I don't think, surely there will be roles that disappear, but I don't think there's going to be kind of a mass, culling of roles, but it will change the nature of roles. You're going to have to interact with it. You're going to have to use it. And if you don't, you're going to create a real problem for yourself in 10 years.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Well, thanks for your time, Adrian. I think you've got a great story, and you're a natural storyteller. So I think not just me enjoying it, I think the listeners will enjoy it as well. So if anyone has any questions and they want to reach out to you, is that something you're open to?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to send anything through, more than happy.
That's the best way. Get you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thanks again for your time, and appreciate you coming on the CFO Track podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Tom. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to the CFO Track. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with a friend.